Hello, and welcome to the Intrepid Sea, Air, and Space Museum's live public programming, High Flying Design. My name is Karen. I'm an educator here at the Intrepid Sea, Air, and Space Museum located in New York City. The museum's live public programming is free, so if you'd like to donate and help us in supporting this delivering this content, please click on the link in the comments or in the chat. Now, today we're going to be discussing a little bit about aviation, and at the end of our presentation, we're going to be doing a quick project together. So if you'd like, you can run and grab a sheet of paper, just like this one here. It can be any type of paper, preferably nothing with homework on it or an assignment. And you're also going to need a pair of scissors. Now, if you don't have scissors or you can't use scissors, feel free to just rip it at the end. I'll show you how to do that as well. So just again, my name is Kara, and I'm an educator here at the Intrepid Sea, Air, and Space Museum, where our mission is to honor our heroes, educate the public, and inspire the youth. So in the chat today, tell us where you're tuning in from, if you'd like to tell us if you've ever been to the museum, and feel free to participate and ask any questions throughout the programming as well. So let's get started. Like I said, today we're going to be talking about aviation and how airplane designs help them get off the ground, stay in the air, and land back down safely. So just to get us started with a little bit of background information, this is the Intrepid Museum today. We are located right in between New Jersey and New York on the Hudson River, and our museum is housed inside of a historic World War II aircraft carrier, the USS Intrepid. Now, just a little bit of specs about the Intrepid Museum. It is about 913 feet long. It's about as big as 3 football fields on top, side to side. If you were to take that ship and put it on the side, it would almost be as tall as the Chrysler Building. Now, if you look at this picture from that tip top all the way to its lowest deck, the Intrepid is about 8 stories tall. So it's really massive. If you were walking down the West Side Highway, you can't miss us. Now, the Intrepid began its construction in 1943, right before the U.S. was sent into World War II after the bombing of Pearl Harbor. The Intrepid served during World War II, the Vietnam, and the Cold War, but also served as a recovery vessel for NASA in the 1960s, picking up astronauts. Now, if you look really closely at this picture, you can see that there are airplanes on top. Now, let me know in the chat if you know what this type of vessel is called that carries airplanes, and I did mention it earlier. Now, at the time, it was really impractical and very difficult to take these airplanes and have them fly from one continent to another. So vessels like this were created to help carry those aircraft. So let me know in the chat if you know what this vessel is called, or this type of vessel. Now, if you said aircraft carrier, you would be correct. Intrepid kind of served like a floating airport. It would carry those airplanes. They could take off and land just like you would at an airport. So the Intrepid served from 1943 to 1974 before becoming the Intrepid Sea, Air, and Space Museum in 1982. So let's take a look inside the museum, and I'm going to take us to our chairs exhibits. Very exciting, right? Now let me know in the chat if you can tell me which chair you think is a boring chair. Maybe not boring, we'll say ordinary. Which chair do you think looks the most ordinary to you? Let me know in the chat. Maybe just a regular old chair. Maybe you might even find it at home. Maybe it's not very interesting because you might find something like that in your community as well. So if you would have said the green chair, maybe you were thinking of the green chair. Yeah, it's kind of not very interesting. But even though it doesn't look very interesting, its design, a lot of thought and design went into creating a chair just like this. Now, there weren't just all these physical jobs on board Intrepid, but there were also a lot of jobs that required a lot of sitting, a lot of paperwork that had to be done. And you would find these chairs in places like the mess deck where they would eat. Radio men would use them, administrative personnel. But what's really interesting about this chair is that it had to be light enough that you could pick it up and move it around the ship, but it also had to be heavy enough to where if a big wave came and hit the Intrepid, that chair is not going to be sliding all the way around. So like I said, a lot of thought went into the design when these engineers were creating these chairs. Now, next, I want us to look at a chair that looks pretty comfortable. Maybe It would be described as cozy or cushiony, something that you could curl up on, have a cup of tea, something that just looks really, really comfortable. Let me know in the chat. So if you would have seen that those two brown chairs right there in the middle, we would have been on the same train of thought. I think that one looks really comfortable. These chairs would have been found in the pilot ready room, and this is where the pilots would go to prep their assignments. So they also had a desk on the side that could swivel up, and they could put their work on top of it, and that's where they would learn about their missions and their assignments. In this picture here off to the right, you can see that there is a compartment underneath that could hold their materials as well. Now, if you visit the museum today, you can see this pilot ready room and what it would have looked like in the 1960s and 70s, right before the pilots would go off to do their missions. Now, going back to our chairs, let me know in the chat a chair that you might find intimidating or maybe a little scary. Maybe it makes you uncomfortable. Something that looks like it might hold you down too. Really interesting chair here. Let me know in the chat which one you find a little intimidating or a little scary. So if you would have seen that chair, it's the second chair. It's got a lot of straps and it's got a lot of cushion to it. I was trying to think which chair here would be a little bit intimidating to me. If I had to be strapped down in a chair, which one would look really scary? And that, my friends, is an ejection seat. So this is an ejection seat or a pilot's seat. And this is where the pilots would sit in their airplanes. Now, if they got into a bind and they needed to make a quick getaway, they would actually pull that strap on top, it's black and yellow, or they pull it in between their legs, and a small explosive or a small bomb would actually go off. This chair would launch the pilot up into the air, their canopy would come off, and it would launch him into the air. The chair and the pilot would separate, and the pilot would deploy his parachute, and that would help slow him down as he's coming back down to the ocean. Now, chairs like this weren't around until closer to the Vietnam War. Or World War II airplanes were not as advanced to have ejection seats in them, so this is the type of chair that you would find later on closer to the Vietnam War during the jet age. So let's imagine that this pilot received his mission in the ready room. He was ready to go off. He's in his airplane. He gets into a bind, and he's got to pull that lever and eject himself out of the jet, right? So, of course, he's going to land in the water once he deploys his parachute, and he's waiting out there for the Intrepid. Now, the Intrepid isn't nearby. So he gets picked up by another ship, and they call the Intrepid, and they say, hey, we have your pilot. Come pick him up. But how is the pilot going to get from ship A to the Intrepid? Which one of these chairs do you think could help him get from one ship to another? Let me know in the chat. And maybe this picture here will give you some clues. So which chair do you think would get him from one ship to the other? So if you look here, you can see that our pilot, who is on ship A, has now got himself onto a zip line going back to the Intrepid. This picture makes me very uncomfortable because I am very scared of the ocean. And underneath, you can see those waves are rocking. And using this chair could be very difficult at times. You had to think about those two ships going at the same speed. If one was going too fast, it might pull that line at an angle, and that pilot might be stretched out a little bit. These ships had to consider the waves and the weather, right? If these ships are bumping up and down, that pilot could be bumping up and down in between them as well. But also the distance between these two ships too. If they got too close to each other, you might dip that pilot into the water and get him wet. So a lot of thought went into using this chair, right? And so I personally think that this was just as scary as the ejection seat because I wouldn't want to be dunked into that ocean water. So now that we've talked a little bit about these chairs here that we have at the museum, I'm going to stop here and see if anybody has any questions. What is the black and green chair at the far end? So let me take us back to our chair exhibit and get a closer look at this. The chair at the far end, that black and green chair, is actually a dentist's chair. So these men are on board from anywhere from 6 to 9 months. And if you think about it, think about your whole school year. being on the Intrepid. So that's plenty of time to get a cavity, to get a toothache, and even a cleaning, right? You're supposed to get cleanings every 6 months. And so there was always a dentist on board. There were always doctors as well, just in case you got sick or they got sick, really. And they always had surgeons on board too, just in case somebody needed surgery as well. So the Intrepid was kind of like a city at sea or a community at sea. Everything you'd find in your community, you'd find on board the Intrepid as well. Good question. Are there any survival supplies or equipment that are also packed with the ejection chair? So the pilots always had their flotation and their vest on at all times. So just in case they needed to make a quick getaway and they were going to land in the ocean, they always had their life vest on, just in case. They also sometimes carried signal mirrors with them as well. And they always had their helmet on too, just in case something happened. Good question. Awesome. So we're going to go on to our collection of our airplanes, because I did mention that we were going to be talking about aviation and how things fly. So this is our TBM Avenger, and this is one of the primary planes of World War II. It's also one of the oldest planes in our collection at the museum as well. If you look a little closely to this airplane, you can see that it's got that big bomb or that torpedo right underneath that fits right into the belly of the airplane. That weighed about 2,000 pounds. It also held 3 people. It held the pilot. Of course, the plane can't fly without a pilot. You had the radio operator and the tail gunner as well. So tell me in the chat if you find anything interesting or particular about this airplane. Compare it to maybe airplanes that you've seen at airports or maybe at other museums. Is there anything very interesting about it, whether it's its design or its color? Let me know in the chat if there's anything really interesting about it. So automatically, and I see some of us saying the wings, right? Automatically, I noticed the wings as well. Now, a lot of people think that they might be broken, but they're actually folded, right? So try to imagine that you've got airplane wings and stretch your arms out nice and wide. Now, I already can't stretch my arms out because I've got this wall here right next to me. If I try to turn with my airplane wings, I'm hitting my computer screen. I'm hitting a plant on my desk. But now take your airplane wings and fold them in for me and then move side to side. Did you hit anything that time? Probably not, right? The Avenger had a wingspan of about 54 feet. So this is a really large plane. And trying to be able to fit all these airplanes inside the Intrepid was really difficult if you had all your airplane wings out at the same time. So they created them so that they could fold in so that you could fit more airplanes on board. Now, like I said, its wingspan was about 54 feet long, and it went at a top speed of about 276. So it's really huge, it's very heavy, and it doesn't go very fast. It weighed about 18,000 pounds with that 2,000-pound torpedo. Now, there are a lot of extra pieces into going into creating this plane and helping it to fold those wings. If you look a little closer, you can see that there's all those wires and extra pieces that help it, right? So like I said, it was very big. It didn't go very fast. It actually was nicknamed the turkey, or a turkey, because it was kind of clunky and it didn't fly very fast. So you're probably thinking, this is a really huge airplane, right? How does it get up into the air, stay there, and land back down safely? So looking at its color as well, it's got what it's called counter shading. It's a little darker on top, and it's really light and white on bottom. And that's because these airplanes, like I said, they didn't go very fast, and their job was to be a torpedo bomber. So they actually had to get very low to their target in order to accurately drop that torpedo. So the idea was that if you're underneath this airplane, and you see it up above you, it's going to kind of blend in with the clouds, hopefully, right? And if you're another airplane looking down on the Avenger, it's going to kind of blend in with the ocean as well. Because like I said, it wasn't very fast, so it needed all the help it could get to kind of blend in as well. So aside from its physical features, like its wheels, right, and its wings, it also needs a little bit of extra help to get off the ground. And that's where our 4 forces of flight come in. And our first force is going to focus on this front piece of the Avenger. Let me know in the chat if you know what that's called. I'll give you a hint. It goes around in a circle, and it starts with a P. Let me know if you know what that piece is called. It's what helps the Avenger move in the forward direction. So if you said propeller, you would be correct. That piece right in the front there that goes in a circle is called a propeller. But what's really interesting about propellers is that they can also be found on ships. The Intrepid had 4 propellers, and the propeller also helped the Intrepid move in that forward direction. So think about if you're swimming. Most of us swim like this, or maybe you kind of do this, but either way, you're pushing that water backwards while your body is moving forwards, right? Newton's third law says that for every action, there is an equal but opposite reaction. So if you're pushing that water forward, it's going to move you in the opposite direction. I'm sorry, if you're pushing that water back, you're going to be moving in the forward direction. So again, our propeller on the Intrepid would move and scoop that water backwards, helping the whole ship move in the forward direction. So going back to our Avenger, that propeller in the front works the same way. Now, air is, kind of moves like a fluid, right? And that it flows. So it doesn't move like water, but it is a fluid, like I said, in that it flows. So again, that air is going to be scooped by the propeller, pushed backwards, and help this Avenger to move in the forward direction. Now, like I said, it happens in the water and it happens in the air, and that forward motion or that forward force is called thrust, and that's what gives that airplane that ability to move in the forward direction. Now, you're probably thinking, Kara, I've been to an airport a million times, and not every plane I've seen has propellers. How do those other airplanes move in the forward direction and generate thrust, right? So you've probably looked at planes like this one, the Fury. Now, the Fury is a jet plane, and if you noticed already, it doesn't have that propeller. But what it does have is a jet engine. It generates thrust just a little bit differently. So basically and simply, the jet airplane, or the jet plane, takes in this huge gulp of air. That air moves down the belly of the jet plane. It compresses it. It mixes with jet fuel, and then it's lit on fire. Now that blast and that ignition is blasted out the back of the airplane, helping that jet engine or that jet to move in the forward direction. So just like the propeller helps the Avenger move in the forward direction, the jet engine helps that airplane move in the forward direction. So it still has thrust, it's just generated in a different way. So this plane has a smaller wingspan than the Avenger. It goes out about 37 feet, and we'll talk about its speed in just a little bit. So now that we've talked about thrust, right, the force that pushes us in our forward direction, can anybody think of the force that holds us back? The force that, let's say you're running outside and something's going to push on your face and maybe slow you down just a little bit. Can anybody think of that force? Let me know in the chat. Like I said, if you're running outside, maybe there's going to be something hitting you in the face, maybe resisting you to move forward. So if you said drag, you would be correct. So like I said, force is what pushes us in the forward direction, but drag is what actually is holding us back. Now, drag is generated by a solid body coming in contact with a fluid. So the solid body being our airplane and our fluid being our air. Now, for there to be motion, there has to be, if the plane isn't moving, there's not going to be any drag hitting on that as well. So I also like to think of it, if you take your hand and you hold it out and you've got a nice large surface area there and you move it back and forth, you're going to be feeling a lot of air resistance. But if you kind of make your hand a little more streamlined and then toss it back and forth, you're going to feel less drag because you have less surface area. So think about that later on when we're talking about the design of airplanes and how their design helps them move faster or slower or keep them back. Awesome. So like I said, thrust is what moves us in the forward direction. Drag is what holds us back. Can anybody think of the force that holds us down to the ground? The one that keeps us from floating away? If I told you to stand up and jump in the air and stay there for 10 seconds, could you be able to do it? Probably not, because you're probably feeling the force of gravity holding you down. It's the reason that you don't float away, right? The heavier you are, like the Avenger or a plane in general, the harder it is going to be for you to get off the ground, because gravity is going to be working against you. Gravity is also what helps us maintain control and how high we can go in the sky as well. So now that we've really thought a little bit about these three forces, we're still missing one more force, right? So as we take a walk around our Fury here, I want you to take a look at this particular shape of the wing, and that is called an airfoil. So here you can see it in that red piece right there. Oops, get it a little closer. So that red shape, it looks like a teardrop, or it kind of looks like an eyebrow, right? Right here. There we go. And like I said, that shape is called an airfoil, and it helps that airplane get off the ground. So we've got force that moves us in the forward direction, or thrust, I'm sorry, that moves us in the forward direction. We've got drag that holds us back. Talked about gravity. Now we need to think about the force that helps us get off the ground. If you know the name of the force, put it in the chat for me. But basically, the way that this airfoil works is air hitting the plane is moving over and under the plane. But what's really interesting is the air moving on top is moving really, really fast. Now, back in the 1700s, there was this scientist named Daniel Bernoulli, and he was learning a little bit and studying about how air moves as a fluid. And he found that faster moving air creates an area of low pressure. So, like I said, you've got your airfoil, you've got your airplane that's moving through the air. That air is hitting the airfoil, and it's actually being split on the top and on the bottom. Now, I said that on top, you've got fast-moving, really low pressure, and on bottom, you have slow-moving, high pressure. Now, the thing about high pressure is that high pressure always wants to be in the area of low pressure, gets really jealous. But, of course, this pressure can't go through our airplane wings, so it actually helps lift it. Now, Daniel Bernoulli isn't the only scientist whose principles are at work here. We also have Isaac Newton. Earlier, I mentioned a little bit about his third law. For every action, there is an equal but opposite reaction, right? So if you've got your airplane wing and you've got your air going over it, that air is actually being deflected downward, causing our airplane wing to move in the upward direction. So going back to Daniel Bernoulli, think about that high pressure moving to that area of low pressure as if you were standing in a line. And you're in line for your absolute favorite snack, and there's only one line, and it's really, really long. A new line opens up for your favorite snack, and there's nobody there. What are you going to do? You're going to move over to that area of low pressure, right? But so is everybody else. So just like our we want to go into our second line, right? So does that high pressure. It wants to move to that area of low pressure. And like I said, it can't go through our airplane wing. So it's actually going to be able to lift us up off the ground, or the airplane, right? So looking at these two airplanes here, and just to reiterate, right, we've got our lift that gets us off the ground. We've got our gravity that's working against us, holding us down. We've got thrust that moves us in the forward direction, and drag that's holding us back. So now thinking about the design of our airplanes and their jobs and how they fly, try and think about which plane would go faster. Based on all the things that we just learned about, which one goes faster? Let me know in the chat if you think it's A, the Avenger, or B, the Fury. Like I said, based on their design, how they're built, maybe how heavy they are, the type of thrust that they generate. Do you think a propeller plane goes faster or a jet engine goes faster? Let me know in the chat. Alrighty, so if you would have said the Fury, you would have been correct. It almost goes about 3 times the speed of the Avenger. The Avenger only goes about 276 miles per hour, where the Fury goes about 681 miles per hour. So it goes a lot faster. It's got that jet engine. It's also designed differently too. It's more streamlined. It's less bulky than the Avenger. It's also not carrying that 2,000-pound torpedo as well. So it's just an overall faster airplane. So I did mention about the 4 forces in the up, down, left, right directions, but depending on what you're doing, the forces can be in a different direction. Earlier, we talked a little bit about our ejection seat, and if you can see the pilot here is ejecting out of that plane, our thrust is actually moving in the upward direction. It's not moving in that forward direction, but it's actually going in the upward direction, pushing that pilot up. If we think about our parachute, our drag is also going up, right? Because as our parachute is coming down and catching that air, our air resistance is pushing up on the parachute, causing our pilot to slow down and land safely in the water or the land wherever he's landing. So with our 4 forces of flight, we can do some pretty good maneuvers, or pilots can, at least, right? Airplanes don't just go side to side, but they also do some rolling motions. And in order to do those maneuvers, you have to use your control surfaces, right? So you're not just using your propeller and your jet engine, but you're also using flaps that are located around the airplane as well. So as we walk around our plane here, you can see that long piece right there is our ailerons. Now the ailerons kind of control the roll motion. So imagine that you're at the top of a hill and you're rolling down. That's what those ailerons control, the rolling of the airplane. As we walk around to the back of the airplane, those flaps that you see on the left and right are the elevators. Now, just like an elevator goes up and down, it's called pitch. It's what helps that airplane go up and down as well. Like I said, they're located on either end of the airplane. That big yellow piece right there is called the rudder. And just like on a ship, you have a rudder that helps the ship move side to side. It does the same thing on the airplane, and that's called yaw. So like I said, it helps it move in that side to side motion, just like you would if you saw it on a ship. Now, pilots use these control surfaces to help the planes move in different directions. And they just don't go side to side, but they have to use their ailerons and their elevators at the same time, or their rudder and the elevators, to do all these kinds of cool maneuvers that have to require them to maybe roll or go upside down and control all those maneuvers. Awesome. So just to reiterate, our 4 forces, we had our force that holds us down to the ground is our gravity. Lift is what gets us up there using those airfoils. You have the force that moves you in the forward direction, thrust, and the force that holds you back is drag, right? So this is a good place to pause for questions if anybody has any questions. Do all planes use airfoils? Yes. So as we walk, as I show you more airplanes that we're going to see in a little bit, every airplane uses some sort of airfoil. Whether it's an airplane or a helicopter, you're going to see that special shape on the rotors and on the wings as well. Good question. How many planes fit on Intrepid? Ooh, good question. So I did mention earlier that we had a lot of airplanes, right? With our Avenger having to fold its wings back, and even our Fury has to fold its wings up. The Intrepid could hold about 100 airplanes between the flight deck and the hangar deck. And the hangar deck is that area that we've been walking around that we've seen these 2 airplanes in. And that was kind of like the garage of the ship. So when the planes weren't being flown off the top, they were being stored in the hangar deck where they were being repaired, or they were just being stored until they were ready to go up and fly off. Good question. Awesome. So I mentioned earlier that the Intrepid flight deck was used to launch and land airplanes. Now that is not an easy thing to do. As you can see, oops. There we go. As you can see here, you can see that this airplane is going to take off. And I mentioned at the beginning that Intrepid's about 913 feet long. On the flight deck, only about 250 of it is used as a landing and takeoff area. So it's not a lot of space and a lot of room to generate that thrust to get these airplanes off of the Intrepid. So they had a little bit of help. Now, the Intrepid used steam catapults. So steam was generated in the engine room of the Intrepid, and it was set up, and it basically launched these airplanes off like a slingshot. It would help build up that speed a lot faster to get these airplanes to make sure that they actually took off and didn't just roll off the front of the Intrepid. Now, launching airplanes is called the cat shot, and it takes about 2 seconds to go from 0 to 150 miles per hour. So it would go from 0 to 2 seconds and 150, or 0 to 2 seconds, 150 miles per hour. So extremely quickly. So getting off the Intrepid was just as hard as landing, right? So think about the Intrepid being out at sea. You're going to have the waves that are kind of moving it side to side. The Intrepid was also going about 40 miles per hour. So these planes had to land on a ship that was moving, but also being rocked by the waves as well. So if you look here in this picture, you can see that the plane has a tail hook. It's that white and black piece. And basically, when these pilots were coming in for a landing, you can see that on the left picture there that there are these arresting cables that are stretched out across the deck of the ship. Now, the plan was to drop that hook, catch that hook, and it would stop that plane from going from 0 to 130 miles per hour in just a few seconds. So those arresting cables would absorb the shock of that plane coming in at full speed. And there was about 5 or 6 arresting cables on the flight deck as well. So again, here you can see that that plane and that pilot have put that hook down, coming in, and this one caught that arresting cable on that right-hand picture there. So I mentioned earlier that we were going to hit on the topic of helicopters. So taking off and landing on the Intrepid and looking at planes like the Avenger and the Fury, you need a runway. You need some space to generate that thrust to actually get you off the ground. But what's really cool about helicopters is that they do something called VTOL, or vertical takeoff and landing, which basically means that you do not need a runway to get these airplanes off. That thrust is generated by their rotors on top. So if you were to zoom into one of these rotors, you would actually see that airfoil shape up there as well, because not only do you find it on airplane wings, but you also find it on the rotors of a helicopter. So looking at this plane right here, this is called the Sea Guardian. And if you've looked at emergency vehicles in your neighborhood, like police cars or ambulances or fire trucks, you might have noticed that they are the same color as this helicopter right here. And that's because this helicopter was a search and rescue helicopter. Notice the colors. It's got red, it's got white, it's got a little bit of blue in it as well. So like I said, this was a rescue helicopter. If somebody was out in the water and they needed rescuing, they would drop this basket down into the water, kind of scoop them up, and they were able to bring them into the helicopter. If you look on the side there, what's really interesting about this helicopter is it's got those kind of buoy-looking things called sponsons. Now, this made the helicopter amphibious. It could actually land on the water, which I don't know of a lot of airplanes that can actually land on the water. And it could float. And this helicopter actually completed it rescued about 15,000 people in the 26 years that it was in service. So you've got the same forces, they're just working in a different way on these helicopters as well. So speaking of vertical takeoff and landing, we also have airplanes like this at the Intrepid. Now this is the Harrier Jet, and it's located with our helicopters at the museum. So let me know in the chat why you think this airplane would be with the helicopter collection. Let me know in the chat. It's called the Harrier Jet if you know a little bit about it, or why it would be grouped with helicopters. So if you look a little bit closely, you can see that on the side there, this jet has those, they kind of look like gills or vents. Those vents could actually be turned downwards at a 90-degree angle, and this airplane could actually take off and land vertically, just like a helicopter. So it didn't need that large runway like our airplanes normally do, but it could take off and land vertically. So it was more efficient for it to take off for it to take off with a runway than to take off vertically because it took a lot of fuel. Yeah, and I see Vahanara says it's a VTOL or a jump jet, right? Because it could just jump in the air. It didn't need that runway. And of course, the less weight it had, the easier it was to get off the ground because you have less gravity pushing down on you, less mass you have to get off of the ground. So moving down our flight deck here, we also have an A12 at the museum as well. So let me know in the chat, just by looking at this airplane and thinking about the four forces, how do you think this airplane flies? Do you think it goes really fast? Do you think it goes really slow? What do you think, or how do you think this airplane flies just based on its design? I noticed right away that it's very streamlined, it's very sleek, it's a very skinny plane. So you have less air resistance or less drag, right? So I think that it goes really fast. It's also painted black, so you know that it flies at night. It's trying to be secretive, right? So this plane was actually owned by the CIA, and it's the fastest plane in the entire world. It went about Mach 3, which is about 2,300 miles per hour. So it went 3 times the speed of sound. It's the fastest airplane ever made. So just thinking back and comparing it to the plane like the Avenger that we saw that has a 54 feet wingspan, this plane has about a 55 feet wingspan and it's about 100 feet long. So it's very long, it's very skinny, and it's not super wide as well. This plane could actually go from Washington, D.C. to California in just over an hour, just to kind of give you an idea of what going 2,300 miles per hour looks like. Our last plane that we're going to look at here in our collection is our Concord. So this is the fastest commercial jet, right? This one went about Mach 2, about 1,400 miles per hour. I'm sorry, yes. If you take a look at the shape, it's kind of shaped like the A12 as well. It's very sleek. Its wings are very skinny. This plane could go from New York to London in about 2 hours and 54 minutes. So retired in 2011, Concords aren't being used anymore, but it wasn't a cheap flight to buy. If you were going to buy a ticket on the Concord in the 1990s, I'm sorry, flights were about $6,000, about $1,200 round trip on this airplane. So it went super fast and it was very expensive. I see Vahanara said they could fry eggs on the dashboard of the A12. Yeah, so both of these planes went so fast that they would actually heat up and then actually expand and they would get really hot. If you were on the Concord and you were touching the window, it was very hot from how fast these airplanes were going. Awesome. So I did mention at the beginning that we were going to do a quick project here at the end. So if you want to grab, just like I said, a sheet of paper, can be this size, about 8.5 by 11, excuse me, and grab a pair of scissors. Again, you don't, if you don't have scissors or you can't use scissors, that's okay. You can rip the paper, and I'll show you how to do that. But while we're waiting, if some of us want to get our paper, are there any questions? Why don't we use the Concord anymore? So that's a really good question. So like I said, it was really expensive, right? It was about $6,000 to buy a one-way flight back in the 1990s, and it was about $12,000 to buy a round-trip ticket. So it wasn't very cheap to get on it. So that was that narrowed down your pool of people that could actually afford to buy tickets, but it was also very expensive. The fuel, it used a massive amount of fuel, and it just, in the end, wasn't cost efficient anymore to keep it running because it was very expensive to keep in service. Good question. What happens if a pilot missed the cable for landing? So if the pilot was coming in and they missed that cable when they put their hook down, that's called a bolter. So these planes had to come in at full speed. They actually were not slowing down when they were going to land on the Intrepid. Just in case that they missed that cable, they had to keep going, fly around, and land on it again. Good question. Awesome. So by this point, hopefully you've gotten your piece of paper and your scissors, and I'm going to walk you through on how we're going to make this plane. So you're going to start off with your piece of paper long ways, right? It'd be nice if you put it on the table. It's a little easier to have it over you. And you're just going to take that paper and you're going to fold it in half. I like to call it hot dog style. Just fold it in half so it looks kind of like a hot dog bun. And make sure that those creases are nice and tight, that you've made sure that you've got that nice line coming down the middle. Now, in that top corner there, you're going to take the corner of the paper, that right-hand corner, and you're just going to line up the corner with that middle part of your piece of paper. Or if it's easier, that top part of top right-hand corner. Now, I'm using construction paper, so you're going to see me making sure that my creases are nice and tight there. You're going to do that to the left-hand side as well. Make sure that your corner comes down, it's lined up with the middle, and your right-hand side, so that it looks kind of like a house, right? You've got your roof of your house already built. So what we're going to do next is we're going to take that right-hand side, right, of our right-hand triangle, and we're just going to fold that into the middle. Again, I'm using construction paper, so it's really tough paper to fold, but it makes for a really sturdy airplane. So on the right-hand side there, you can see that I open it up so you can just see one more time where that piece of paper is going to line up with that middle piece. Like I said, folding it in the beginning gives you that nice crease so that you can follow along. Next, you're going to take that left-hand side, and you're just going to line it up with that middle portion right there. Make sure all your creases are nice and tight because you don't want your airplane to come apart when you're flying it. Now, no plane is going to be complete without wings. So what you're going to want to do is you're going to fold your airplane in half and make sure it's nice and tight along that middle line there. And again, you can't have an airplane without wings. So what you're going to do is you're going to take that top part, right-hand part of your triangle, and you're just going to fold it downwards, creating a wing. Make sure everything's folded nice and tight. You're going to flip it over, and you're going to do the exact same thing to the opposite side as well. So you're just going to take that top part, that top corner, and you're just going to make sure that it lines up with the bottom part of your airplane, creating two wings there. Because like I said, you can't have an airplane without airplane wings. So here we have a really simple airplane, but we want to make it a little bit cooler, right? We're going to add some control surfaces that we talked about earlier. So now if you have scissors, you're just going to cut a nice little flap on the right-hand side there, sorry. And you're not going to want to fold it down all the way to where it makes a crease. You just kind of want to make sure that it's just resting there, because you can also fold it down as well. So on the left-hand side there, you can see I tore it just in case you don't have scissors. Like I said, you don't want to fold it down and you don't want to crease it really tight. You just want to have them resting there. And if you want to toss it and see what happens if both of your flaps are up or both of your flaps are down, and see what direction it goes. So next we're going to add a rudder to our airplane. So we're just going to make two snips there. And again, don't fold it all the way down and make a crease. Just have it kind of resting there, just like that. And you can move that to the left or you can move it to the right. So I would experiment and see what happens if your flaps are up or down or to the left or right. Now you've got an airplane with some really cool control surfaces. All right, friends. So thank you so much again for joining me today. The museum has introduced a lot of live stream programs that you can find on our website at intrepidmuseum.org, or you can subscribe to our channel or like us on Facebook. Our next program is going to be this Thursday, May 13th at 3 p.m. It's going to be Journey to Space. So come learn a little bit about Intrepid's history with NASA and what it takes to survive and live in the vacuum of space. Now, just as a reminder, the museum is now open Thursday through Sunday from 10 a.m. to 5 p.m. So I hope that you all can come check us out and see some of these really amazing airplanes that we have in our collection. We also have a submarine and a space shuttle as well. So if you enjoyed this program, we invite you to answer just a quick survey located in the chat or the comments. So once again, my name is Kara, and thank you for joining me on today's Intrepid Adventures. See you next time.